The topic of the second session is climate change-related industries and gender equality, and I will introduce the moderator. He is the former ambassador for climate change of Republic of Korea. I would like to turn the microphone over to Executive Director Yoo Yeon-chul of a UN Global Compact Network Korea. Good afternoon. I am Yoo Yeon-chul, Executive Director of a UN Global Compact Network Korea, and we are going to talk about the future industries and gender equality, and one of the future industries was AI, and the other one is a climate change related industry. I think that is a very good definition of a future industry, and you may wonder why the executive director of a UN Global Compact Korea is a moderator. And to briefly explain the UN Global Compact, you may know the UN, or also that you will know the global, but what does it mean when we say it's a compact? So compacts may mean the cosmetic product used by the women. However, it could be cosmetic products. However, here, the compact is a noun that means is a promise or agreement. So at the UN level, the global companies made a commitment toward the meeting the SDG goals. So in a word, the UN Global Compact is an organization that supports the companies so that they can meet the sustainable goals. So especially the SDG number 5 is gender equality, and the global change is SDGs number 13. So that's why we are here. In the second session, we are going to talk about the industry's transformation resulting from global change and gender equality issues. And we have two speakers, and Marumita Mohanty, the UNEP Program Manager, and we have Chief Economist Officer, Chu Moo-hyun from the Institute for Regional Industry and Economy. And also as a panelist, we are going to hear from Ms. Maria Holzberg and is Vice Director Park Hyun-jung. Please welcome the speakers and the panelists with a big hand. We don't have much time, so let us right into the presentation. The first presentation.
매니저님께서는
So Ms. Parimet Mohanty, sustainable energy storage, and gender empowerment in the climate industries. She is an expert who has accumulated experiences in more than 20 years. And for today's presentation, she will talk about gender equality and the social inclusion in the future climate industries. Please give a big hand.
Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege to be here in this august audience, and this workshop itself is actually so insightful. And in the first time, actually, I'm hearing artificial intelligence and gender equality, the nexus between that, which itself is so nice. And I hope this session is also going to be quite insightful. What I'm going to talk today is gender equality and social inclusion in future climate industries. So basically, I will talk about how gender equality and social inclusion can be considered in the climate industries and what UNEP, along with its other partners, are doing in this sector. So before going into this, let's first see what are the kind of climate change impact that's happening on the main sectors, such as agriculture, food security, and health, and how is it impacting women. So we can see the figure here. 4 out of 5 people displaced by climate change are women and girls. Globally, women have 27% higher risk than men for facing food insecurity. As far as climate change impact on loss of livelihoods, poverty, and mortality is concerned, World Bank report says that 32 and 132 million people could fall into extreme poverty by 2030 due to impact of climate change. And most of them, majority of them, are women. Again, women and children are 14 times more likely to die in extreme weather events, including extreme heat conditions, than men. So these figures, these facts are glaring. And we can see that there is already lots of inequalities that exist, and it's disproportionately affecting several sections of the societies, including women and marginalized communities. So there is definitely a need to think how we can include gender equality and social inclusion aspects. But let's see which are the sectors where we need to make more focus. So the sectors are, as it has already been mentioned in the opening remarks and in several colleagues earlier, if we have to transform into a net zero societies, then which are the sectors which needs more attention? So on the right side of this graph, you can see it's a graph prepared by international energy agencies, which talks about, and lots of other experts have consulted to find out which are the sectors that will contribute for net zero emissions societies. Then it's basically buildings, transports, industry, electricity, and heat. So these are the sectors. They have also defined the key milestones in the pathway to net zero. So milestones has already been defined, sectors have already been identified, pathways have been designed and finalized. So the question is whether in these pathways, gender equality and social inclusion has been considered or not. And if it is considered, how? How are we planning to achieve while including gender equality and social inclusion? The approach needs to be defined, needs to be discussed, and it has to be make sure that both gender equality and social inclusion are added in these sectors. Now the next point is, if those are the sectors where actually within the climate industries, the jobs or the livelihoods that's going to be created. No doubt it's an energy transition. Renewable energy and energy efficiency, for sure, but smart buildings, smart materials, smart cities, smart and climate resilient agriculture, digital technologies and for climate actions, effective transport systems. These are the future industries where lots of livelihoods and jobs that's going to be created. Again, we have to make sure that gender equality and social inclusion are included. It's not that women are getting more opportunities for jobs, but they should also play an equal role in the decision-making space. So we have to create that equal space for everyone, not only as a consumer, but also as a supplier and also as a decision maker. So that's something what we have to make sure. So there is a huge scope for livelihood generation and job opportunities for women and vulnerable communities in these climate industries. So now the next point is where exactly and what kind of job opportunities that exist if we move from conventional energy into a more efficient, sustainable, inclusive, just energy transitions. IRENA report, International Renewable Energy Agency report, says there is a huge job opportunities. And if I read it, then it says that by 2050, around 120 million jobs that would be available in the energy sector. That includes fossil fuel, nuclear, hydrogen, everything. But if I focus only on the renewable energy sector, then there will be around 24 million jobs in the renewable energy sector that will be created by 2050. These jobs needs to be or ought to be available, accessible for both men and women. So that's where the approach needs to be. Of course, there are lots of gaps at this moment. We know that when the fossil fuel transition is happening, the people who are losing their jobs, their skills at this moment are not sufficient or not enough to cater to the kind of jobs that's going to be created with energy transition. So there would be a gap in the skills. There would be a gap in access to information. But we have to make sure that both men and women should get equal opportunities in this job or the labor market. So now with all those contexts, I would try to bring some of the UNEP's initiative through its own partners, either by other UN agencies or with international collaborations. So one of the example is Empower. So we have a joint program between UNEP and UN Women. My UN Women colleagues are here, and I'm sure Maria is also there virtually. So it's an joint programs. It's funded by government of Sweden, government of New Zealand, Germany, and Switzerland. And the overall objective of Empower is mainstreaming gender equality and human rights in climate action, in energy action, and in disaster risk reduction action. However, one of the important components within Empower project or program is creating climate resilient livelihoods for women and vulnerable communities using renewable and low carbon technologies. So this is what we have been focusing upon. And in order to achieve this, what we are trying to do is we are trying to work on access to finance for women and marginalized communities, access to technology, and access to skill sets. When I say access to finance, what we are trying to do is mobilizing investment for clean energy and providing affordable finance to women and marginalized communities to run their businesses. This is what we are trying to do. But as you know, enterprise has different size and different profiles. There could be nano-entrepreneurs, micro-entrepreneurs, startups, SMEs, MSMEs. So there are different kind of enterprise, and their requirements are different. Their finance requirements are different. So we are working with different finance mechanisms. So we are working with fund managers, trying to set up different finance facility, which is specifically and dedicatedly for women-led SMEs, working in climate-positive interventions. We are working with microfinancing institutions and banks, which are relatively smaller enterprise with a lesser finance requirement. And we are setting different loan and credit schemes in an affordable rate. We also run different accelerator programs for startups, and then we promote more climate tech startups, provide lots of training on different topics, and help them to raise investment. So basically, we work on the different scale and different profile of women entrepreneurs and raising investment, providing access to affordable finance so that they can run their climate businesses. Besides this, as I said, we also work on access to technologies. So we have already implemented number of projects or interventions using low carbon technologies. You can see those examples. It could be for solar drinking water, it could be for solar drying, solar cold chain, or irrigation systems, or selling renewable energy products. I mean, these are few of the examples, but that could be n number of examples for bringing renewable energy technologies and using it for enterprise development. We tried to provide, and we did a market assessment trying to find out which are those low carbon technologies which has a potential for women economic empowerment and entrepreneurship development. So that's where our focus has been. And we are trying to bring technologies for the benefits of women and marginalized communities. The third point, as I said, is access to skill sets. So when we say skill sets, we have dedicated capacity building program for enterprise development for women and marginalized groups. But beyond that, we also have skill development program for job creations in energy transition sectors. So there are different subsectors that have been identified, again by IEA, IRENA, by UNEP, on all those different subsectors which needs workforce in those subsectors. So we will have dedicated skill development program for women in those lines. So that's the upskilling part. But we also focus on reskilling. That's what I also heard today. And the World Economic Forum has already said that we have to have artificial intelligence, cloud computing, big data and other technologies for high priority for business leaders. So we need, even all those businesses, the reskilling of that. And Empower program has all this focus in all those three segments or sectors, but specifically for women and marginalized communities. So the second example that I would like to take here is on extreme heat. We heard so much about extreme heat and how the temperature is being rise in last few years. So if you see, then extreme heat is going to be a big climate challenge in coming years. Considering that, United Nations Secretary General has called for an action on extreme heat on 25th July 2024. And that call for action has talked quite a lot on how can we provide effective cooling options and managing the heat stress for vulnerable communities. So that's where the focus is. I'm not going in detail of all these facts, but this is mind-boggling. This is already threatening how extreme heat is creating lots of impact on jobs, on mortalities, on labor forces, on students. So there are lots of impacts happening. Heat stress and women, again, it's glaring facts. I'm not going in detail of this because of time constraint, but I'll share this presentation, and you can see that heat stress is going to impact women badly. I mean, of course, with pregnant women and women working outside, they are going to be highly impacted by this. So what's the solution? One of the things, again, what UNEP, along with its multi-stakeholder partners, trying to do is we're working on the cooling options. So in COP28, 71 countries have agreed and came together, and the Global Cooling Pledge was announced. One of the objectives of Global Cooling Pledge is to provide sustainable cooling options for all. So how can we provide access to cooling for all? That's one of the focus, to make sure that the vulnerable communities, make sure that those people, the informal groups who are staying in informal settlements also have better cooling options. So that needs to be ensured. So considering all those things, again, Cool Coalition, along with its partners, are working on passive cooling options, nature-based solution, national cooling action plans, and make sure that the gender and social inclusion are included on all those national action plans. So we are also discussing with number of sub-region and trying to develop roadmap for passive cooling for vulnerable communities, and integrating gender and social inclusion in the cooling actions. So that's something what we are trying. Beyond this, as I said, transport has been one of the big sector contributing to high emission. And when the transition would happen, we also need to have effective mobility systems, transport systems. One of our projects, again, it's a multi-stakeholder program, which is running in 40 countries, where we are supporting 40 countries, and with an investment of around $50 million US, and there are lots of components involved in that. One of the components talk about integrating gender issues into electric mobility and work with policymakers in designing gender-responsive policies and solutions. So in transport sector also, we are trying to see how can we prepare more gender-friendly vehicles, how could the pathways and the transport system should be much more gender responsive. And how can we make sure that all those vulnerable communities have access to better transport systems? So we are working with different policymakers and including those aspects strongly. Besides this, we are also working with specific countries, for example, in this case, Indonesia, where we are trying to develop socially inclusive, sustainable energy transitions. This is something what UNEP Collaborating Center, which is called UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, is working and trying to develop lots of technical assistance component and capacity building supports, and including the social inclusion component in the energy transition pathways for a specific province in Indonesia and at the national scale in Indonesia. We definitely needed more such projects to be included in the region and make sure that the social inclusion aspects be integrated. The last example, what I would take, is of CTCN. So CTCN is under the technology arm of UNFCCC, and one of the objectives of CTCN is to provide climate-friendly technology and creating enabling environment for promoting climate-friendly technology. And it's more on technology transfer. So under CTCN, there is a dedicated targets, and if there is a gender equality-driven technical assistance submitted by the country, then CTCN will consider it on a priority basis and provide that technical assistance. CTCN also came out with gender and technology nexus reports, which talks about how the technology needs to be customized as per the need of different community in the society, including women and vulnerable communities, and then design the technology accordingly or promote those technologies specific for bringing more benefits for women and marginalized communities. They also provided dedicated capacity building programs specifically for women. So recently there was some training on artificial intelligence for climate actions, considering women as the core beneficiaries. So these are few of the examples. This is my last slide, and few key takeaways from the context and the examples, the best practices, what I try to share. Again, I will not read it all. It's already there, I mean, in the note. So one of the key takeaway is future climate industries and just transition need to be sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. And we have to consider the benefits of all the segments of the societies. Access to finance is going to be a big points for achieving net zero targets. Gender responsive climate finance is extremely important, and we have to have gender responsive climate finance targets and indicators in that regard. Access to skill sets and digital technologies must be brought in to improve the clean energy transition, and that skill sets needs to be available and accessible for everyone. And we definitely need stronger and larger international collaborations in order to achieve the huge goal that has been set. But without that, without achieving the net zero targets, we all know the repercussions and the consequences. The positive part is there are lots of interactions, collaborations that have been established, and we are really looking forward for more collaborations with communities like you, with organizations like you, to make the net zero transition as a real success within the stipulated time period. Thank you so very much for your attention, and looking forward for more collaboration in future. Thank you.
예, 모한티 매니저짐 열정적인 발표.
Well, that is a very passionate presentation. Thank you. You talked about this bigger impact of climate change on the women and other vulnerable communities. And you also talked about the importance of women being included in the decision-making process and being included in financial access. And now I'd like to move on to the second presentation.
장님께서
And we have Dr. Chu Moo-hyun. He's the Chief Economist Officer of the Institute for Regional Industry Economy, and he's researching on the division of the labor market resulting from the climate crisis. And today he's going to talk about the transition into the carbon neutral economy and the prospect for employment. Good afternoon. Since I'm the last speaker, I'm not sure this is a fortunate thing or unfortunate thing because everybody will be tired and I need to speed up because we are behind a slightly schedule. So I think my mission is to meet the given the time. As I prepared my presentation, I thought it would be better to explain my background every 2 years. So human resource supply and the demand is published. And 20 years ago, I introduced the report and its a research mechanism at Korea Employment Information Service. And the gender capability, the impact, the survey, has been conducted. And before, I systemized the capability evaluation system. And I recently was asked to assess the impact of a net zero economy on the employment, especially there are a lot of uncertainty in the future, especially the employment of women. And I was asked from this Women Research Institute, and I answered that it is impossible to give you the prospect because it is too uncertain, and I'm an economist and I work on diverse data sets, and I do not make a data that describe a gender difference. We all have ideas and the concepts about the gender issues, and I thought we do not have to distinguish woman and man in the gender issues. However, that we want to provide statistics and objective figures that describe the employment of women or the jobs of women. And to do that, I think that we have to look at the current circumstances that are on the way, because that will be a very good clue for us to predict the job issues, and especially the gender-based job issues and inequality among genders. And to predict these issues, we have to accurately look at the current employment structure and employment mechanism. Last week, I attended a regional economic development forum in the Copenhagen and Malaysia, and I'm really happy that I can speak in Korean in front of this audience, because I had to listen to English presentation and discussion for the 2 days. At the time, the climate issue was the main theme, and also we talked about the digital issues and the gender issues that are unfolding at the local level, regional level, and how the gender issues will evolve in the future. And there are a lot of countries situated nearby to each other in the European continent. And I personally thought that we can get ahead when we compare ourselves to other countries, given the current changes. However, we have to talk about the women and the gender issues whenever there are changes, because the changes will unsettle the situation of the vulnerable groups. Also, it can change the economic status or social status of a people, and otherwise we wouldn't have been worried about the impact of changes on the gender and especially the women. And there could be the rosy picture and the gloomy picture. And for the gloomy picture, I'm going to touch upon that in my slides. And the speaker from the UNEP, I'm sorry, I cannot recall the name. The speaker well explained the impact of climate change on the industries. So I'm going to skip this part. And McKinsey report was mentioned earlier by other speakers, and it basically shows that the jobs are changing, and the jobs can be decreasing or increasing. And there's one clear message in the McKinsey report. And so the Korea, Japan, and Germany, they are the major producer of automobiles, that should be wary of the changes, because the automobile industry is a backbone industry of the Korean economy, and it may face a lot of changes in the future. Another major industries of Korea will be steel making and the chemical industries. As there will be a lot of changes in the jobs in such sectors. But is it just about the number of jobs or the jobs of women and the men? And there's a balance. But when we put every data put together, so electricity, oil, gas, and automaking and fossil fuel-based industries will face significant changes, thereby a decrease in the number of jobs in those sectors. We don't have to worry about the exact numbers, and it is impossible to predict the number, and there's nothing we can do even if we know the number. So rather than the figures, we hope that we will understand the consequences of the change in the employment in those sectors. So how can we respond to these changes? And there are a lot of aspects we need to keep in mind. First of all, we have to think about the regulation. And by the 2030 and 2035, we need to think about the given future, because we need to follow the regulation and like how many degrees there should be dropped in the Earth's temperature, or what percentage we have to reduce the carbon emissions by 2050. These are our targets. However, there's a missing area, and we will briefly, roughly know the figures in the future, but we have to know the changes that may occur by the gender or the jobs or the type of occupation and age group, and there could be different consequences on age groups as well. So we cannot have a complete picture given the complexities of the issues. So let's look at the key industries of Korea and what changes these sectors will experience. So I will look at these the changes in the automaking and the steelmaking industry. So there is the given that the automobile sector is moving towards electrification, while the chemical and the steelmaking industries are different. And we have to find the cost-efficient materials that can replace steel. We have to depend on the steel industries, and the petrochemicals or products that we are using today have been extracted from the petroleum, and the problem is how and how much carbon can we reduce. So technological change is required, and we have to change how we produce those materials and products in order to maintain our competitiveness. On the right-hand side, you can see the transition to eco-friendly vehicles and scenarios for parts makers and the automakers announced by the Korean government, especially the engines of parts is a sector that will face significant change. We need to look at the current situation in order to predict the future. If you look at the slide 8, it describes the number of people who are in the part making, and these are the people who have the lowest level of skills. However, so if you look at 302, so these are large automakers that hire fewer women workers, but in part manufacturing sector, the proportion of women is quite huge. And so 303 and 304 are part making sector where there is a high concentration of female workers. And in part making sector, it can be divided into the engine and other parts. If you look at the right-hand side picture, that you can see the employees by gender and occupational category. So in steel making sector, and this is a steel making sector, and the steel making account for the largest proportion in Korea's emission. So steel industry has to change its processes, and iron ore should be replaced with electric furnaces, and we have to change how we make steel, and POSCO and other steel making companies need to transition into the hydrogen reduction technology. And by 2050, the steel making industries announced that it's transition into net zero economy. And this is the gender-based employment structure prospect. We have to look at the concentration of a female employment. As you see, and there are the managerial jobs, and the proportionally a high number of the people, so female workers are in the office jobs and also administration and the simple labor. And I want to make this a correction, and the women and the men says 0.2%, but it's 21%. And depending on the decarbonization effort of the steel industry, so the things will be different, but the total number of female workers will not change. This is a part highlighted in the yellow. And if products are heavier, then you may think that they are not prone to economic changes and the ups and downs of the economy. However, that is not true. And in the market economy, and the apartment prices are very sensitive to the ups and downs of the economy. The same is for the steel industry. Rather than the employment prospect resulting from decarbonization, in the long term, technological change and the process change will impact the female employment. So we may give more opportunities for the female workers to participate in the high technologies sector, and there is a gradual improvement in the participation of women in the high-tech sector. And the next is the petrochemical industry, and there are a lot of concerns for the Korean economy, and the petrochemical industries accounts for 70% in the carbon emission in Korea. It's almost 20%. So they have to change technology and how they make petrochemical products. What is important is in the gender employment structure and the gender-based the division of labor, and the women will also face a lot of the problem because of their vulnerability in the employment structure of the petrochemical industry. And you can see the proportion of women in number 8 and 9, and the female workers are almost non-existent. It means that the few women are working with the actual production sites. So they are basically they are holding administrative jobs and office jobs, and so most female workers in the petrochemical center are in the administrative support. So there is a male-oriented production circumstance, and when the petrochemical industry is moving toward the net zero economy, then that will be an opportunity for the female workers. So I need to wrap up my presentation, and I can save 3 or 4 minutes by wrapping up right now. And when we talk about the carbon neutrality, we emphasize the fair transition. So we have to secure our rights to fair transition. However, the rights and opportunities are in power dynamics. In case of female workers, most of them are the non-unionized workers, and the male workers are unionized workers. And when we emphasize the fair transition, and unionized workers will raise the issues strongly, and then what happens is, as a result, is should we go for decarbonization, or do you need to stop technology advancement? The first pitfall we may fall into is the trap of low skills, because we are already experiencing that trap in the manufacturing sector and the manufacturing intensive regions. And the many residents in the regions talk about the potential loss of the jobs because of energy transition. But however, there are positive notes as well. And transition into the carbon neutrality required us to change the technology and adopt digital technology, and they embrace automation, and then more opportunities will be given to women than men. That will be a positive scenario for gender equality. And these predictions may not 100% accurate, and I think this is an area of academic discourse. I'm looking forward to your questions as well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for keeping the time. And through this presentation, we could see that what changes may occur in the employment of the steel production sector, automaking, and petrochemical sector, especially in steel making. The processing technology improvement will give more opportunities to the female workers. On the other hand, it can be as a problem for non-unionized workers when the industries move toward the net zero.
온라인으로 참여해 주고 계신 마리아 홀츠버그.
Next, Maria Holzberg, Deputy Regional Director of OIC under UN Women Regional Office Asia and the Pacific, will be the first discussant. While she is joining us online from Bangkok. So is she on? Okay. Then, Maria Holzberg, Deputy Regional Director, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, distinguished Chair. appreciate so much the previous speakers who had framed very, very well. I want to also say a particular hello both to Monyan Yu and Paramita Mohanty for framing. Both of your presentations were so insightful. So hello, everyone in the room. I am so sorry I'm not physically with you, and I really hope you will stay focused for this online version of our presentation. Both of the two previous speakers offered a very interesting perspective as well as hopeful vision for the future of climate industries and the important role that women will play in shaping it. So I really want to thank you both for setting the stage for this dialogue on these crucial issues. And I want to say that integrating a gender focus on climate action is vital both now, today, this moment, and for the future. And I think Paramita really framed that. So today I have the honor to show you, to quickly go through three key areas. So one of them is to talk about why we want to talk about gender and climate change. So why is there a connection between the two? Then I want to talk about, so how, if we're supposed to be gender responsive, what will that look like? What do we mean when we say that? Because climate obviously should affect everyone equally, does it not? The other part, the last part will be focused on, well, how do we work from an international development corporation perspective to really ensure that we can move forward on addressing the climate change. So the first section is to explain to you what you already probably are well aware. For us, and the whole reason for this dialogue is to talk about climate change because it is the defining crisis of the 21st century. And we are today, right now, at a pivotal crossroad. So as you can see on the slide here, we see the statistics from the World Meteorological Organization that there's a 80% chance that the global annual average temperature will exceed the 1.5 degree limit in at least one of the next 5 years. So this increased global temperature means we will have more climate change and climate-induced crisis, which will will increase in both frequency and in intensity. So we are not talking about statistics. We are talking about what is happening today. It is our reality. We need to act now. So the climate crisis is not an ecological crisis. It is fundamentally a question of justice, prosperity, and gender equality. And we look at climate change as a threat multiplier, which means that existing social and economic injustices become worse. And those who are usually in that space are women. So women often bear the brunt of the compounded challenges as they navigate increased care work. They navigate higher rates of gender-based violence, including early marriage. And I will talk about this a little bit further. We know, for instance, in Cambodia, UN Women conducted a report that shows a trend that I think we all should be concerned about. So ongoing droughts are driving child marriages among girls from the poorest households. which then results in other serious consequences as increased risk of intimate partner violence and adolescent pregnancies. So families and households, just to put it into simplistic terms, families that are facing drought situations and may not be able to ensure that there's enough food for the whole family, they tend, we now have it shown statistically, they tend to find alternative ways by marrying their adolescent girls into other families, therefore reducing the burden in their own family. That's a very alarming trend. Also, globally, women perform 76% of unpaid care work. So that means 3 times more than men. This is a global statistic. It will look different in different countries. It will look different in different contexts. But what we know is that women perform more unpaid care work than men do. And during climate-related disasters, this burden increases significantly because women also take on the recovery tasks. And when we talk about unpaid care work, that is care for family members, either elderly or people living with disability in the family, or children, as well as key household responsibilities. So then I will say the thing that we and you and women always say, even though there's disproportionate impacts, women are not just victims, they are also key agents of change. And they're at the heart of climate adaptation, they're at the heart of resilience building and sustainable development. And we want to say this as you and women, and we believe this because it's absolutely important, and we will talk more about women's leadership. But having said that, also, we say that while also seeing how few women gain access to the important leadership spaces that addresses the gendered impacts of climate change. So as previous speakers have highlighted, the global push for net zero emissions really does offer new avenues for women and girls to step into more significant roles in climate action. It is our job to support that process, and this is why we need international development cooperation. We see also through evidence that women's leadership in climate action results in better resource governance. So resources are better planned. Conservation outcomes are better because usually women are in these informal spaces where they need to adapt into the spaces where the climate-induced disaster is happening. And we see that women play a significant role in disaster preparedness. The other thing is that green transitions offer opportunities for women and girls, but without the right support, women can be marginalized again and face unequal access to new emerging opportunities in the green economy. So the time is now. It's not only about looking at the current climate, the state of climate change, it is also about making sure women do not get left off in the green transition process. So to ensure fair net zero transition, we really must integrate gender perspectives into climate action and use this shift to as a chance to address inequalities and fully harness women's potential in climate solutions. So we want to talk about who are the enablers. What is an enabler of being gender responsive or doing gender responsive climate action? And for those who don't know what it's gender responsive mean, it means really looking at the socio norm that is going on in your community and making sure that everything you do actually looks at enhancing gender equality in that community. So the enablers for a gender just transition that that benefits women properly. You're looking at 4 examples on the screen here. So the first one is about women's leadership. They must be recognized as key actors in climate action. So we know, and you know, because we are in a community together, that women do bring important perspectives and solutions, especially in grassroots context, but also across the entire spectrum. So they are very much, and especially those on grassroots level, at the forefront of climate impacts. So it's important to train and to give resources and opportunities to make sure that women can remain on the front lines of climate action and be heard. So the second point is related to the use of gender and environment data. Data is absolutely critical to understand the specific vulnerabilities and needs of women and girls. I used the example of the correlation between droughts and increase in early marriage. The only way that I can use that correlation is because we have statistical and data work to prove it. This evidence creates effective climate policies that address the unique challenges experienced by women. So integration of gender-specific data in policy development helps to design interventions that are both equitable and impactful and really help track progress of ongoing efforts. So the third point that you're looking at on your screen, it's about the climate policies and specifically, most importantly, underline it in your notebook, budgets, and making sure that when we allocate the budgets, they're done in a transparent way. It's important to use the global frameworks that already exist to guide us in how to integrate gender considerations into national climate efforts. So, because when you use an international commitment, which has been agreed by a consensus of governments that have shared their good practices across the world, we know that we can create standards that are of the highest nature to follow to ensure that gender equality is embedded into domestic agendas. The final point you're looking at in your screen is about strengthening women's economic empowerment, which means that women need to have access to economic resources, credit markets, and enabling them to invest in resilience building activities and technologies. We also want to provide support to reduce the care work. Remember, I said unpaid care work is one of the biggest barriers for women's for women to access employment. It's important for them to have ways to ensure that their care burden is reduced.
And Maria,
yes.
Maria, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you. We have time constraint. So can you wrap up your presentation?
Yes, I will do the last 2 slides because I will make a comment about from my colleague, Paramita, who gave an overview of a initiative that UN Women and UNEP are collectively doing, which focuses on climate financing. So I will end on why we want to do international development cooperation. And where they will fill the gap. So national policies and frameworks are absolutely important. We need to share resources, best practices to align efforts. And we need to make sure that there's a pool of resources that streamline mutual support to ensure that no country and no person within the country is left behind. So when we look at the way ahead and really about what we need to do to foster, we want to talk about aligning commitments towards gender action. So it should not be an afterthought. We want it to be put into the center because the people at the center of the impacts are women in communities. We want to talk about co-financing, and Paramita gave an excellent presentation on why it's important for the financing. And we're not just talking about political will, it is about ensuring that also budgets are being financed. We want to talk about knowledge sharing, but that's what we're doing right now. And then finally, my last point is to talk about effective collaboration, because it is so important that effective collaboration is not effective unless it involves governments, NGOs, private sector, and most importantly, the local communities. So we should not do a top-down approach. We really need to look at an inclusive, multi-stakeholder approach that we can create to create a truly transformative response to the climate crisis. And I will think there to the end.
예, 마리아 홀츠버그 부소장님 또 발제 감사드리고 또 시간을
Thank you so much for your speech. My apologies for not giving you ample time for your speech. She gave us the key factors for gender-responsive climate actions. Now I'd like to invite the second discussant.
And Hyunjung Park from the Institute for Climate Change as an Action will talk about a just transition toward gender equality. Nice to meet you all. So I am the Park Hyunjung, and I am a Vice Director of the Institute for Climate Change Action. And we have been here for 4 hours. So I have a mission to complete my discussion in 5 minutes. I'm a very talkative person, but I'll do my best to give this presentation in a short time. If you look at the characteristics of a female employment in carbon-intensive industries, they are low female employment rate, marginalization from core production systems, and non-unionized labor. So when we assess the impact of the carbon neutrality on the female employment, are the female workers vulnerable or not with transition into net zero? And climate crisis brings us a complex disasters, and we have to deal with employment of women from not just from a policy perspective, but also from the employment and this narrative perspectives. I want to use these images, and this image was from the Gyeonghang Daily. And the title of this article that used this image is "No corrective actions was made to after sexual discrimination was found in employment." So about the 200 findings were made, and only 20% of these problems were corrected. And we are now very sensitive to economic situation, and we are pushing forward with green growth. However, it's not easy to grow the economy like in the past. And when the economy enters a low growth period, and women who are sensitive to the economic changes are likely to lose jobs. And this picture was from also a Gyeonghang Daily. And the carbon neutrality should be an opportunity for all. And labor affected by the net zero are raising their voices right now. So, however, as you see in the picture, those who are standing in the light are the male workers. However, they are the workers that are left in the shadows. These are female workers in carbon-intensive industries. We want to create a new future, a new world with a net zero. However, not all opportunities are given to women, and our basic rights said that no one should be left behind shine, but some of the people are not getting the spotlight. And this picture is often used to describe the equality and equity. This shows excellently the difference between equality and equity. And when we give the same things to everyone, does it mean the equality? And we have to recognize the differences of individuals. For tall people, they do not need steps. And those who need the steps will be the smaller ones who they need more support. So we do not distribute the same thing to everyone, and we consider the individual context and they give the opportunity to all. When I showed this picture to one of my colleagues, and maybe these men can do something for the small children. But we want all these people, including small kids, will be autonomous. So also in just transition and the climate justice, we have to consider the different circumstances of individuals. And these are messages for just transition, but nothing is easy among this list. But we have to give transition opportunities in a just way. And green growth was mentioned as a new paradigm in order to boost our economy. And what was the role of women when we pushed forward with the green growth? So women were required to recycle waste and save a lot of electricity. Women's roles were very limited when we talked about the green growth. So these roles were very limited from the consumer perspective. And carbon neutrality is a global agenda that we need to do in order to make a complete transition, and the role should be equally assigned to women. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a very precise and a strong message, and so we have to provide the equity instead of equality, and so equity will ensure that everyone will benefit from carbon neutrality.
Now it's over 6 o'clock, which was a time we were supposed to end this forum, but we've received 2 questions from the floor. So for these 2 questions, we'd like to provide an answer for these questions. So after this, we will conclude the forum. The first question is about the energy industries to empower women and increase participation of women in the climate industries and others. What are the specific examples of this? For example, could you provide more details on the nature of these programs and the channels through which they are being conducted? Additionally, what are the challenges of these programs? So this question is directed to Mr. Ju.
Thank you very much for the question. In order to encourage female workers' participation in the economy, many companies introduced programs. However, their efforts are not sufficient. So POSCO, a steelmaker, or some major petrochemical companies and the automakers put a slogan of a shared growth and the ESG. However, if you look at the details of the ESG programs, it's just about the integration with the residents and the eco-friendly approaches in the management. However, I have a doubt whether they put sufficient effort and put sufficient financial resources into the efforts. So I may not be so accurate in this assessment. However, so when I the research and to some write a report, and when I assess the ESG practices of a Korean companies, their policies and actions are not sufficient. And the government is also implementing some problem, and the Ministry of Employment and Labor so focuses on transition the regions. So at the regional level, it is promoting the economic participation of women or transition into other industries among vulnerable groups. But according to our assessment, not much budget has been injected. In 2023, the employment project budget totaled 30 trillion won. So, however, such programs budget was a mere 10 billion won. There was one more thing, and Ms. Maria Hosberg mentioned, and other speakers mentioned as well. So probably many want more precise prediction. But when we have a prediction with the data, maybe it's too late, because already the changes have been already occurring. When we grasp the data for the predictions, a lot of the things we predicted become a reality. So I think it is more important to analyze the reality with the given data. Thank you very much. Please give a big round of applause to Dr. Ju.
두 번째,
The second question. I think this is also a very good question. Climate-related projects have to consider economic viability. Currently, there is a strong perception industries focused on climate change and environmental sustainability are less profitable and struggle to generate financial returns. I question whether these industries are adequately incorporating gender equality. Personally, I believe there is still much progress needed to be made. I'd like to know if there are any successful cases where gender equality has been effectively integrated into climate change initiatives, what outcomes have been achieved, and what are your takes on the future direction of these efforts? This question goes to Ms. Mohanty. Please give us a brief answer.
For this question also, this is very important and critical. There is a strong perception that it's not, or the climate change and environment. And environment sustainability are less profitable. So here, if you see various reports, which says that at this moment, the cost of electricity from solar, from wind, and from battery storage are definitely lesser than the fossil fuel-based cost of electricity. So from that perspective, the economically, if you say, it's more cheaper. And it's for the first time in 2023-24, renewable energy-based electricity generation was cheaper than fossil fuel-based. However, the perception remains that renewables is much expensive because it's variables, it's time sensitive. So the moment we design, many times it's believed that it's expensive. So the perception remains that it's expensive. However, in few countries, it's still expensive as compared to fossil fuel-based. And it's mainly because it depends on 2-3 things. A, how you design the whole systems. So technology optimization, design optimization is extremely important. The second point is, what are the regulations of your countries, whether it's allowing different type of tariff structures and interconnections or not. So based on your life cycle cost analysis, if you see, renewable energy projects are much comparable as compared to fossil fuel based. And if you add the opportunity cost, that means the time saved by environment friendly technology, the drudgery saved, and the kind of deforestation saved, if you consider all those things, the opportunity cost into your economic cost, it's much more viable as compared to fossil fuel-based systems. So it depends how you design, how your policy and regulations are, and how optimization being done. The second point is, yes, I also agree to your point that there is still much progress needed to be made to integrate gender equality in energy and climate initiatives. There are examples, there are companies who are including ESG compliance, the environment social governance compliances, and the gender equality component, but it's not enough. We also are working with a number of those initiatives and trying to see how we can integrate gender equality, but it's still on a cases basis. However, the positive point is at least we have examples. We have plenty examples, but that needs to be upscaled at a very faster rate. The third point, the gender equality has been effectively, whether we have examples, gender equality. So if you see the NDC, the nationally determined contribution, out of 179 NDC, I think 120 plus NDC just mention about gender equality in their NDCs. Just mentioning about gender equality doesn't make any sense. So there are only 50% of those who talks about how that will be achieved. And there are very few countries which sets targets for gender equality. So what we need, the last question on the future directions, we need targets to be set. We need clear indicators to be set. And we need monitoring and evaluation framework and reporting framework which can monitor how the progress is happening. We don't have any standardized M&E framework at this moment, but there are lots of discussions happening. I'll also say what Maria said, data. Data is so important. So there are lack of data which can create evidence between the nexus between gender and climate change. We need to have evidence-based policy making for which we need data. There are lots of discussions happening on this, but we need to progress faster. But as I said, the positive point is at least lots of discussions, lots of movement and progress happening on this. Time is the matter, and we have to act on that fast. Thank you.
모한테 우리 매니저님 아주.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Mohanty, for your very passionate and detailed answer. And Ms. Park Hyun-jung, can you also give us a comment?
해야 되니까요.
So I'll be very quick. So we need to look at the parameters, and given the parameters and the economics of viabilities may be undermined. So however, so we have to think about the climate change environment from the consumption perspective as well. And in our case, in Korea, so climate change has not been incorporated with gender equality, and I hope to see the best practices to appear in Korea. It was a very concise and a clear message.
To these questions, if you want. No? Okay. 그러면 시간
Then, in the interest of time, let me conclude the Q&A session here. Now, I will conclude this session with the titles of the two presentations. The future climate-related industries will work for carbon neutrality, and based on social inclusion, they will have to make a just transition for gender responsive and gender equal transition. And for this, women who are most vulnerable in this transition should be given more leadership position and should be given more empowerment and accesses. And to enable this, we need to have an international collaboration. And with this, I'd like to conclude this session here. Thank you so much, the two speakers and two discussants. And the audience who has stayed with us until the end. I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to you all. With this, I'd like to end the session here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for staying until the end. We would like to thank the staff members of the Ministry of Gender Equality and the Family, and the speakers and the moderator, and the fifth the Korea Gender Equality Forum. So I believe the laid the foundation for the international community and the Korea to move forward the gender equal society. With this, we are going to conclude 2024 the Korea Gender Equality Forum. Thank you very much.